Hey legends, welcome back to Here's Rodder's Reviews. I'm your host, Rodney Stewart. We're getting into the first episode of Masters of Universe Revelation. I have been waiting for this for so long, probably the better part of a year and a half now. I'm a huge Kevin Smith fan, and I was following his podcasts well before they saying that he was going to be doing it, but he was talking for months beforehand about a show that he was going to be the showrunner for. He could say nothing about it, but he was going through stuff like, it was a childhood classic from the 80s. A lot of people are going to enjoy this, early 80s. And like, there's a list of stuff in my head, and there's a huge amount of cartoons that I was a fan of back then. I was born in 79, so the early 80s was my time for checking out cartoons. So I was thinking, okay, whatever it is, I'm on board for it. So this is going to be full of spoilers. If you don't want it ruined for you, go watch the show. Come back if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on the episode. I'm going to be doing these back to back. I don't intend to actually go to bed tonight. I'm going to watch each episode and record a review directly after it. I'm having a good time with this series so far. Only one episode into it. So, I'm going to give you a few seconds right now to skip off the episode, whether you're watching it on YouTube or you're listening to the audio podcast version of it. If you're not interested, get out now. You have been warned. Right, episode 1, The Power of GRAYSKULL, is the title of the episode. And in this opener, we basically get an updated version of what we remember from the 80s. It is done so well. Honestly, I actually got on the Twitter after the episode and I tweeted Kevin Smith. And I'm like, just finished episode 1 of Masters of Universe Revelation. Loving it so far. Simple little tweet, sent it off. Within a half an hour, I got a like from Kevin Smith himself on Twitter. So he's on there keeping an eye on what people are thinking about it, and absolutely fantastic. The opening of the show is fairly different from what we would have seen in Masters, He-Man and the Masters Universe in the early 80s, but it's similar as well. There's enough there to kind of mirror the original opening to the show, but it's updated with the way that they present it. There's still photograph, still imagery of everything, characters, and very, very much in the original style of the 80s show and the opener. But getting into the episode, I was thinking, okay, the biggest thing here that's going to put me off this here is getting used to the voice cast of the characters, because for a show that you've got fond memories of as a child, you're watching an updated version. Okay, it looks similar, but are they going to have the same? Of course, they're going to have similar personalities, but are they going to, are they going to try and make them sound like the older ones? But it's just, that was a worry that I did have going into it. But by fairly quickly into the episode, I was completely won over by the entire voice cast. Absolutely fantastic. The casting of the actors that's doing the voices on here. I'm doing a series of reviews in the horror podcast at the minute for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so I'm up to my ears in classic Buffy at the minute. And of course, Sarah Michelle Gellar is voicing Tila. And I thought, right, this is one voice that's really going to be pulling me out of the show, because as soon as I hear the voice, I'm going to be thinking Buffy the whole time. But that only happened for about a minute and a half. She owns the character of Tila right now. So good. And for another little callback to the original, Alan Oppenheimer pops up as a voice in this episode as well. The voice of Mossman. Now, Alan Oppenheimer played both Skeletor and Man-at-Arms in the original show. So there's a nice bit of fan service, and this entire first episode is essentially fan service for the classic fans of the show. Brilliant, and there's been no secret about it that the stakes are a lot higher in this series, and some of the characters that we know and love are not going to make it to the end of the series. Now, I've been trying to avoid as many spoilers as I can up to this point, and a few things have gotten through, but I'm taking it with a pinch of salt right now. I have in my own mind, if they're going to do something, I've got an idea of how I would go about it, and it does touch on it in this episode, close to the end of it. Teela is adopted by Man-at-Arms, and her real mother is the sorceress of Castle Grayskull. So I was thinking, okay, revelation, maybe there's going to be a handoff from the sorceress to Teela to take over in this series, and that's maybe what the revelation is going to be. But again, I was going into it thinking, alright, the biggest secret on this show is the fact that Prince Adam is He-Man, but I was thinking, nah, I don't think I'm going to do that. But they do it by the end of the episode. There's a lot of stuff gets revealed in this opener, but basically what we get at the start of it is we see an image of He-Man bringing 2 prisoners to Castle Grayskull, and he manages to, the sorceress comes out, the drawbridge opens, the sorceress meets them there, and one of the prisoners transforms into Skeletor. He changes to Skeletor, and in his hand he's holding the shaping staff. Big callback to the original series. The shaping staff is a fantastic episode, and it could change people to show them as someone else, and he does that. The 2 prisoners, one is Skeletor, the other is Evelyn, and the He-Man that brings him to Castle Grayskull turns out to be Faker. So that's another character from the original series. So they get in to Castle Grayskull, and at the palace we get to meet all the characters there. The King and the Queen, so well done. Again, the cast and the voice cast is absolutely fantastic. Queen Marlena was news to me. I couldn't recall if you've got the usual suspects as far as the people that know who Prince Adam actually is, but in this episode, when Prince Adam is going to change the He-Man to head off to Castle Grayskull, she's like, be careful, son, and like, she knows. So that's probably something that came later in the original series that I haven't caught up to at this point, but I digress. Essentially, Skeletor gets in to Castle Grayskull, starts a full-scale attack on it, and the good guys come to the rescue, and we get a kick-ass fight in this first episode, and you get to see all the classic characters in there. Beastman's there, Trapjaw, they're all there. Triclops, Evelyn, Skeletor, all the main people are in this first episode, and they're going to town on each other in the fights. And an interesting thing, if you're watching the fight and you see like vehicles moving up towards Castle Grayskull, they actually took the time, they didn't just render a close animation of the vehicles in this series. They actually took the original toys and scanned them into the computer, so what you're actually seeing in the episode is an actual recreation of the toy that you'd been able to buy back in the day. Absolutely fantastic. So He-Man turns up, they get into Castle Grayskull, and Skeletor has finally worked out that Castle Grayskull, it's the seat of power we've always been led to believe it's the seat of power for Eternia, and that is true. Whoever's got, rule of Castle Grayskull is, masters of the universe, basically. But he's worked out that the castle itself isn't the praise, it's what's underneath the castle. That's the praise. And he gets his way down in there, and Tila follows him down. He's expecting He-Man to turn up, and He-Man does come at the last moment, just as Skeletor's about to attack Tila, and the fight commences between the two of them. And the fight that you see in the trailer is basically the fight you're seeing at the beginning, in this episode. And Moss Man turns up after Skeletor gets the upper hand on He-Man. He-Man drops the sword of power, and Skeletor's on his way to grab hold of it. Moss Man turns up, and he grabs hold, and he's flipping huge in this episode. He's like twice, 3 times the height of Skeletor, and Moss Man can disguise himself as like trees and grass and all that sort of stuff. So he's made of wood, basically. So he grabs hold of Skeletor with like these vines and presses him into the wall, and he's like, your very presence here is disgusting, get out of here now, sort of a deal. And Skeletor's like, after you, Moss Man. And you see his Havoc staff, the mouth opens up and this flame shoots out and just incinerates Moss Man. So that's the first major casualty of the series right there, burned to death. And He-Man can't believe what he sees, actually loses all control, and he goes at Skeletor with the sword of power and actually stabs him through the abdomen, just through the stomach. The last thing you're expecting He-Man to do in the original series was actually use the sword to actually really hurt somebody or really stab, and you don't see that stuff in the original series. Incredibly family friendly, but Skeletor is like completely crazy, and he's like, you finally used that sword the way it should have been used, boy. Then he finishes it off with, as the key to the Hall of Wisdom, there's this thing behind him, He-Man not realising that there's a hole in it where if he puts the sword of power into it, it'll open up and reveal this orb inside it, which is basically the source of all the magic on Eternia. And that's where it all came from. The magic started there, Castle Grayskull, and created Eternia and all the planets and the whole universe and whatnot. So it's the centre of the galaxy they're in. And Skeletor has this all worked out, and it opens up, and he's like, this is my power now, I'm going to have it. And he lifts the Havoc staff and hits the orb with it and cracks it open. It's like, this power is going to be mine. And then all time stops, and the sorceress turns up. She's frozen time for a second or two, and she reveals, okay, we're in serious trouble right here. This is the energy that created everything, and if we can't stop it here, it's going to destroy everything. Everyone's going to die. Eternia is going to be gone. The entire universe, everything ends in this moment. And Tila is like, we're all going to die. Why did you bring us all here? And the sorceress is like, I wanted to see you one last time. And I thought, okay, right, we're going to find out. I'm like, maybe I'm going to be right about this. I don't know. Tila doesn't know the sorceress as her mother. There was an episode in the original series where she did find out, but to protect Tila, that memory was magically taken from her again. They just felt that it was too dangerous for her to have that memory. But the sorceress, if she had time, probably would have told her in this episode. But they come up with the idea that if He-Man calls on the power of Grayskull in the form that he's in now, He-Man and not Prince Adam, of course, he pulls the sword by the power of Grayskull. The energy comes down, transforms him into He-Man. But what's going to happen if he does that, and he already is He-Man? Could he use that power with the sword to, cancel out the energy of this blast? And the sorceress is like, the power sword could in fact do that, but you're going to have to be wielding it at the time. So he calls on it, and in the background Teela is kind of like, what do you mean in this form, sort of thing. Like, she doesn't know Prince Adam's secret, hadn't a clue throughout the entire original series. And when time starts again, He-Man has called on the power of Grayskull, and the power sword starts to absorb the explosion essentially from this orb. And as the energy as the energy's gone into the sword breaks in half, and you see the power sword changing into like two separate swords in He-Man's hand. And Teela's kind of like blinded with the light of everything that's happening at this moment, and she kind of looks over and she sees He-Man is starting to shrink slightly, and she looks at Battle Cat, and Battle Cat turns back into Cringer, and she's like, what the heck is going on? And Skeletor, the truth hits him as well. He's actually a boy, and this boy is holding the power of the galaxy in his hands, and he reaches up, and bear in mind he still has a sword wound through his stomach and out his back at this point. He's on the floor, and he's reaching up, and he grabs hold of Prince Adam's hand, and he's like, no, this power is going to be my power. And at the last second, Prince Adam looks over his shoulder at Teela, and then there's a huge explosion, and all the energy gets sucked back up into the sky. The power of Grayskull energy comes down out of the clouds, transforms, and that all goes back up again. When that all clears, the only people left in the room are Teela and Man-at-Arms. There's no sign of Skeletor, He-Man. Cringer's still there. And Teela drops to her knees. She's like, her whole role was to protect Prince Adam. She's failed in her duty here. And we cut back to Castle Grayskull, the palace, and Man-at-Arms Duncan is giving the bad news to Queen Marlena and King Randor that during the fight with Skeletor, He-Man actually died. And at this point, the Queen breaks down, starts crying, and the King's like, he's all upper crust sort of a deal. I should say, earlier on in the episode, whenever Teela was getting made Man-at-Arms, she was going up in ranks at the beginning of the episode. Man-at-Arms Duncan was standing there. Prince Adam had commented that he's beaming with, he's so proud that he's actually just beaming with, he can't believe it. He's so proud of her. He's beaming with pride, sort of a deal. And King Randor says to Prince Adam, he says that's parental proudness. Something I wish I could have for you someday. So there was always a thing there. The last episode I actually reviewed of the original series that did touch on that, where the king wasn't comfortable in really telling his son how he actually really felt about him. So you get that in this episode as well. He kind of puts Prince Adam down, Man-at-Arms is proud of Teela, his daughter, a parental proudness. I wish I could have it for you, sort of a deal. So at the end of the episode, whenever Man-at-Arms is giving them the news that He-Man is dead, and King Randor is like, Castle Grayskull has lost its champion, And Marlena breaks down completely and she's like, no, we've lost our son. And it finally starts to dawn on the king, that what was Prince Adam and He-Man? Couldn't be. And then Duncan actually tells him the truth. He's like, He-Man, Prince Adam, we're one and the same. But he made us promise that we wouldn't break a secret. The king loses all control at this point, and Duncan and Tila, they're standing watching on. Cringer's there in the background along with Orko, and the king strips Duncan of his title of Man at Arms, tells him to get out of the palace. Don't ever come back. If I ever see you again, I'm going to execute you. And he orders Tila to take her father out and make sure you kick him out of the palace. And she drops her sword and she's like, no chance. She goes off and on. She's like, you're all liars, and just talks directly to the queen. It's like, you knew all along, never told me anything. You didn't even tell your husband. Everybody she trusted her entire life, the whole circle, Orko, Cringer, Man at Arms, they all knew that Prince Adam was He-Man. She just feels completely, everybody I've trusted my entire life have been lying to me from day one. I have had enough. I quit. I'm out of here. And she basically just turns her back, walks out of the palace, and that's kind of where we close out the episode right there. Now, the thing I found great about this episode, like, we're having big fights and big confrontations between the cast originals and Man at Arms and Evelyn are fighting with each other at a point, and she takes a blast from her staff towards Man at Arms, and it stops dead in midair, doesn't hit him. But then Orko appears and he manages to deflect the shot long enough, but he does take a hit and falls to the ground. So Orko in this episode, we do get to see the clumsy Orko at the beginning of the episode, and he was trying to help the scared Cringer. All the celebrations going on, fireworks. Cringer was scared, and Orko decides, I'll put him in an airtight bubble, a soundproof bubble, so he can't hear anything. But the bubble was airtight as well, so the Cringer couldn't breathe. But then Orko couldn't get him back out of the bubble. But Prince Adam had a pin, busted the bubble, and Cringer got out. But we get to see that side of Orko that we all know and remember, the clumsy little clown magician sort of a deal. But by the end of the episode, we get to see the bravery and the character as well. So I'm very, very interested to see what they're going to do with Orko in this series. That was a big point of the debate and the writing of the show. I don't want to get into too many details, but I've been talking for flipping ages right here about this episode. Like, right now, the amount of time I've talked, you could have watched the episode. But I'm interested to see what to do with Orko, because he was just thinking back to the way people thought of the show whenever we were originally watching it. Orko was kind of like the Scrappy-Doo of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. You always had that character that was insanely annoying, that drove people up the wall. Scrappy-Doo did that for Scooby-Doo. Any other examples? Pretty much any 80s cartoon you can think of. Transformers, Spike. You had Spike in there. He was fairly irritating. Season 3, his son Daniel came in, and he was beyond irritating. Dungeons and Dragons, Bobby, he would have drove a saint to punching people. Every show that I can think of in the early 80s had one character that was very childlike and not meant to be annoying, but came across annoying at times. Orko was that character, but in saying that, those characters were the way in for the viewer. They were the person that you would take the journey with. Orko was there as the childlike character that appealed to the small children that were watching the episodes. And when you get into the episode, there's a lot of characters in there. We all wanted to be He-Man back in the 80s, but nobody could relate to He-Man. We all looked up to him as a character that we, I remember, like, I remember guys back in the day, and they were like, there was a lot of boys started on the weightlifting and whatnot because they were watching He-Man, the Masters of the Universe, and it had a big effect on people. But as I say, Orko was the way in, and just like Spike, Transformers was the way in, and pretty much all the characters in Dungeons and Dragons were aimed towards the smaller kids. But I think Bobby, more than anybody else, was like the pull-in for that show. That's a bit of a tangent right there, but I have heard a couple of little rumours that got out regarding Orko, so I'm not taking it seriously until I actually see it. So I might actually stick the webcam on whenever I'm watching the next episodes, just to see what sort of reaction I'm going to have physically. It's interesting. I'm really enjoying this series. If you were a fan of the original He-Man, the Masters of the Universe, this first episode is definitely full of fan service for you, and it's tasty goodness.